even before online gaming became almost the norm, almost the norm. A lot of game companies are saying that single player experiences are a relic of the past. A lot of games are using digital delivery systems exclusively. Some games will still fleece people with pre-orders and special editions, which will come with physical things. But more and more of those are purely digital. Even the benefits that people might be given, the zero that gets turned into a one if they pay triple the price. Um, all that's online, and there have been a number of perfectly valid criticisms of the problems of doing things online. Most notably, the fact that game companies will release a half-baked thing and will add features to it later, or rather will actually finish the game after the fact. It's like they have a hard deadline. I've talked about this before, although it was an almost 4.5 hour thing, and I cut it down. It was still more than an hour, and I talked about, of the many things, I talked about how the online distribution uh, possibility allows development to respect their hard deadline because they have commitments, but release a thing which is rushed, um, which can take advantage of the fact that updates can happen after the fact. And it's really bad form. It's a really bad practice from all kinds of angles. It's just poor business to release a product that isn't finished. And the fact that that possibility is there means that something can be pushed out the door, can be rushed, um, when it should have just been finished gently. A lot of companies will have that what I have previously described as the hockey stick, which from the article author, he talks about the hockey stick of effort, where as things are reaching the hard deadline, the release date that was admitted to the public, the hard dates that are often associated with quarterly earnings and stuff like that. So there's investment and possibly legal stuff backing a release date. So it's a hard thing, but the development has been so poorly planned and managed that they realize very late and have to put in 25-hour work days and get this amount of effort just right at the end. And the problem with this additional possibility of post-launch updates means that the deadline, the hockey stick, isn't release quality here. The hockey stick is like out here where it's past the release, where they release something that's kind of, it is just barely fit for purpose. From the the British have a concept of fit for purpose, where they're actually allowed to return a thing, including a digital thing, if it can be determined that it you can't install it, it doesn't work properly. They claim certain system requirements which you meet, but it doesn't actually play on that. So a lot of people would have returned No Man's Sky, for example, which was an absolutely abysmal launch and an abysmal failure in terms of just getting a thing that actually works. And so that late release becomes more and more possible because of this online experience. And I understand all that, but I don't want to talk about all that. I want to talk about the problem of online distribution and online games, including games as a service, which is like subscription based, or maybe it's free to play, but it's constantly reinforcing the idea of bringing players in, having that be essentially their full-time hobby. There even though there might be multiple genres of games, they're all competing for 100% of a player's time. So they're still competing, even though they wouldn't have needed to if they were all offline. It's just like you pay X dollars, you get your cartridge, you play your game for however much time. It may or may not be replayable. You finish it, you can choose to be done, you go to the next game, and some people like this game here and some people like this game here, and maybe they're totally different kinds of games, and this kind of player will play a whole bunch of platformer type games, Mario Brothers type things, and this person will play like the Galaga, the little space shooters, the what is called a bullet hell game, and they don't compete. But nowadays you've got all kinds of games that are totally unrelated that are all designed to capture 100% of a person's time and wallet, and so they're all competing. I don't want to talk about that, although that's an interesting thing, which because I've talked about it before. I want to talk about the archivist perspective, which is you have access to a product, and that product is time sensitive in that eventually the scaffolding, the infrastructure that lets that game, in this case, continue to be fit for purpose, continue to work, that infrastructure will collapse over time at some point, and it's a guarantee. It's an absolute guarantee, and this is because, I mean, the most obvious one is something like abandonware, where the company will just go under for whatever reason. And maybe they're, well, okay, realistically speaking, their intellectual property, the rights, etc., will go to some other body. But there's no guarantee that those other people will do anything at all. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll scoop everything up and they will intentionally not do anything with it. So one company will buy out another company, play pretend, maybe put out one or two other products, and then we'll shut the company down because they were competition. Just step on them. And maybe they'll just pull some of the people out that they kind of curate. They essentially cull the company. But what's left as a regular user is you've got some product that doesn't, that is abandoned. So obviously it's not going to get updates. But from the online, especially games as a service, something like that, the servers are gone. So you can't log into anything, you can't play. And well, obviously if it's a multiplayer game, that's going to be a thing. And it's a little bit annoying because technically speaking, it would be really nice if, even if it cost more, the final gasp of a company, it would be wonderful if they released their server code or something. It'd be nice if they just open sourced it, but dream the dream. Do something so that players can host the server themselves, so that there can just be a tiny community. And there are communities who reverse engineer ways for games which are no longer supported officially for them to connect together. And going forward, that may become more and more difficult as anti-cheat mechanisms are cooked into the games. And that is all depending on the law. So for example, in the United States, reverse engineering is legal. And that's a thing that is actually being fought against by software development companies. And they have a, from their perspective, they have a good argument. It is, however, an extraordinarily stupid, short-sighted, greedy argument that from the progression and continuation of humanity's endeavors, from that perspective, from the archivist perspective, it's going to just lock stuff away and make things impractical, impossible. It's going to take some of the biggest the brightest minds and prevent them from I mean, people will explore things privately, and maybe there will be an underground, but they won't be able to publicize it to make it more broadly usable. And there are problems in that. There's all kinds of possibilities that will dry up because of something like that. So I was so that's reverse engineering and kind of making it possible for the server side of things. But there are now games where they are locked behind. They are unnecessary. There are games that are single player that still require you to log in and authenticate to prove that you're actually licensed, which I understand why I know how a company would argue that that is important, like an anti-piracy thing, but there are a whole lot of philosophical arguments about that, and ultimately speaking, somebody somewhere made a chessboard decision about this and just made it happen without understanding or considering any of that stuff, because it's easy, or you tell somebody else to do it and they just deal with it. But there are already good enough mechanisms in place to ensure that that a licensed copy is run by a person. And there are reasonable arguments that say things like piracy from everyday people is going to happen, and if there's a little bit of it, that's okay. That there's going to be some of those people who will try it and then will buy it, or maybe that there are businesses that will they will there are a lot of businesses that actually pirate their software, a lot. And but larger, successful, not necessarily honest, but they understand the problem of getting caught pirating, and they will license everything. So some companies will make the vast majority of their profit for a software product on companies like that, and then the fact that everyday people are kind of pirating it may not really matter, because what that does is that creates a user base of everyday people that trickles out that's kind of like free advertising. And what it does is it has a bunch of people that are already aware and using the software, and then they become valuable to those companies. So it's like you manufacture a base of competency, and then the companies will feel more accepting of a piece of software because they know that there are a lot of users that are using it. There's stuff like that. Microsoft did that with the Office related stuff, as well as with Windows itself. They give extremely good, well, they'll give free copies of Windows and of Office to schools, for example. And that's now everybody uses it. Now everybody, so now you have a whole lot of people that will, maybe they get student discounts too and stuff like that. I know a lot of university students will get really cheap licenses for everything, and then you have a base, and then companies are where the profit is. But you've all got all kinds of people that are already used to it. It's especially useful when you've got all kinds of proprietary file formats and stuff like that. All a different topic, but the notion is still there. When there's a proprietariness to the software, and it's really easy to do online, and anti-piracy is one of the arguments, but the company does something, changes, dies, the servers go, the licensing checking goes, and something that was bought with a certain idea in mind is no longer fit for purpose, no longer works at all, perhaps. And it's not the fact that it's not being updated, it's the fact that you can't use it at all. And I was as soon as Steam was launched as a service, I understood that problem. And in fact, they understood it. And their argument was, oh, if we ever die, we're just going to flip the switch so that you can just download all of your games. And you don't have to use Steam to connect and to authenticate and stuff like that. And do I believe them? Well, I have the hard drive space to even do that. Will there be an easy way to do that? Will will I have to install every single game? Now, my Steam library is significant, as is most people. I have more games than I have time to play, partly because I will actually review every single game that I play. But I'm sure enough of them are complete garbage that I won't have to spend too much time with some of them. Some of them are like half an hour, and then just this interface stinks. The controls are awful. What was its developer even thinking? If it was open source, I could hire somebody to go and fix it. I'll probably fix it myself. But if I was forced to install all that stuff, I mean, that's kind of a solution. But the problem is, well, what happens if, like, so now I have to kind of carry forward this installation of Windows. I kind of have to upgrade it in place. I have to back up this whole setup. How would I reinstall it in something new that comes out in the future? There's already the problem of, well, a piece of software from 20 years ago for a different version of Windows may not work at all for today's version of Windows. So you have to have a layer of virtualization to allow that compatibility or some other thing like that. So you've got that problem, but if everything's installed, you can't, there's so much complexity, especially when you've got not just the games themselves, but all of the dependencies, which is especially annoying when some of those dependencies don't have a concept of having multiple versions. And if you're ever stuck with something like that, and a piece of software is sensitive to a particular version of a particular library, and that library, you need to have multiple versions of that library for different kinds of games because they were all built against different versions of a library. And if that isn't figured out properly, you're going to have some of the games that will work or will be broken, other games that will just explicitly fail to launch, or other weirdnesses. And if it was a live thing, then you would get updates, or you'd uninstall this version with its version of the libraries, you'd install this version with its version of everything. You can swap between the two whenever you want, just with a re-download or reinstall. But you can't do that if it's all downloaded all on your computer all at the same time, all with this massive tangled mess of stuff that's just installed all over your computer, which is just, it's an awful experience to have that kind of thing. So in terms of the I suppose I could call it the immortality of using a piece of software, using a game, it is impossible as soon as it's online. As soon as it requires updates, and you need to reach online to get updates when there are fundamental flaws. So for example, you get a game in a physical copy of the game, and it is known broken, but it's got a patch. You just have to go online and download the 8 gigs of stuff. But you can't reinstall that because it's going to just be broken on the next install unless you go online to get the update, which is going to require an account, an authentication, it's going to require the servers, and it's going to require... Now, some games back in the day were simple enough or built a certain way such that, so for example, StarCraft and Brood Wars, those old versions of the game actually had a bunches of patches that you could download and update things. Just, it was like balance issues for the developers. Players playtest more than developers, so they found some inadequacies, some issues, and especially once you get into online matchmaking and competitive stuff, when there's imbalances, it's a really serious problem that has to be addressed. So they got patches. You just download this thing, and you can just grab this thing and you can keep a copy of it. You can reinstall from your CD and choose to put these patches on. But there's no real concept of grabbing those data and keeping them and having versions of patches for anything really anymore. There's user related updates like Skyrim mods where you can have a copy downloaded and you can choose to apply it or not. But there's no concept of doing that with modifications, official modifications to the game. And I don't see developers going in that direction anytime soon, if ever again. It's just they want to lock people in. And I think maybe the problem is that there are a lot of games and a lot of new games that are being released, and games go stale quite quickly. Players will play it, and it'll be a $70 game, and it will be, let's say, a few months to play, right? But after that amount of time, that game is no longer in that player's consciousness anymore. They're done. They might come back to it way later, but with that few months, that means there's going to be however many people that are going to be playing it for however long it's popular. That means that maybe it's got an interest of that lasts, let's say a few years. And after a few years, nobody thinks on it. It may or may not get updated anymore. Developers will kind of move on, concern themselves with the next thing. There's going to be no support. People won't really think about keeping archives or backups or anything like that. The developers won't release downloadable patches. They will rot away, and the games that are determined to be less popular will just have their servers shut off. And there are some games where the game just wasn't popular enough, and due to the licensing agreement that when people buy the thing and it's forced to be online and they have an online agreement, that online agreement lets the company just turn the server off. Maybe that game really was only playable for a few years and then they just quietly turn it off. And yeah, they might be stranding tens of thousands of players without being able to play the game anymore, but they're legally allowed to. And there's no recourse for players, even if they wanted to pay more money. They couldn't do it. You can't say something like, well, there aren't many players, therefore there's not much server load, therefore just have that one server running, like pay the however much per month and just let it go. I mean, it's not a whole lot of money to have, like, oh no, you've got 500 concurrent players. If that costs you what, $1 a player or something like that, just keep it going. You keep your players going. But it doesn't work like that because life moves forward. The server software, security concerns, the snapshot in time, it might be okay for a while, but that the rot is going to set in terms of the age of that stuff. Nobody's going to know how to really update that server anymore. If there's online authentication, you've got this old software using the old method with the old server trying to authenticate, and so you've got to now have a backend that maintains the old copy of all of those users' data. So it's not realistic for most companies to maintain little servers for forever. I think Blizzard has an interesting exception for something like that, where they've got really badly made server stuff for their ancient stuff. And that's admirable, but most companies won't do that. So buying an online game is just kind of renting that experience for a while. I've got software that I bought a long time ago that I could virtualize an old copy of Windows 3.1, and I could run that software again. And I can run all kinds of ancient software that way. But all the software that's coming out now, all the games that are coming out now, I won't be able to play them after a little while. They're going to be an experience that is going to be lost to time, and all they will be is a let's play. And there have been a lot of online games that are now all they are is some streamers' old videos, and you can't install or play or examine the game. They're just gone. So you can't have archives anymore. And the fact that they are artistic, well, they're the product of humanity. They're they're the art, they're the data that humanity creates, and it's transient and it's going to be gone. And there's nothing we can currently do about it. We can't third party archive most of that stuff. If you love your game, there's no guarantee if it's online. There's no guarantee you're going to be able to play it or show it or just experience the nostalgia. In 20 years, you want to go play that game. You burnt your childhood. You met your spouse playing this one online game. You just want to log in and log into your old character, go see what things look like, go experience the terrible graphics and stuff like that, and spend just an afternoon checking it out. And you won't be able to do that anymore. It's gone. You'll have your screenshots and that's it. So that's my worry about online anything.